Hey, if you're enjoying Hooks and Ladders, and why wouldn't you be enjoying Hooks and Ladders? Be sure to like and subscribe, follow us on social media, and hey, head on over to songstudio.ca to check out what we're up to. If you sign up for our mailing list, you'll be the first to know everything that's coming up and everything special that we got going on at SongStudio. You won't regret it. Hey, welcome to Hooks and Ladders. What you're about to see is part of what we did at the SongStudio workshop in Toronto in July 2022. There'll be lots more to see. We're just going to roll it out a little bit at a time. So sit back and enjoy. And if you want to know more about SongStudio, visit www.songstudio.ca and check us out. Enjoy.
My Jules Shear, who produced the Jitters second record, told me about being produced by Todd.
Oh yeah,
and he said that it was kind of brutal at times. He would be singing a vocal, he'd be standing at the microphone, Todd would be upstairs in the control room, and Jules could see him reading a magazine while he's recording vocals. So like Todd is flipping through a magazine with his hand on the talkback button, and he'd just go flat, no. Do it again, like that. And he said it was actually kind of torturous.
Yeah.
And the only thing that made it good for him was through a window on the main floor. As he's singing, he was looking through, and then he saw the back of Todd's house where the hot tub was, and Todd's wife came out, beautiful woman apparently,
Michelle Gray.
Michelle, that's right, and she dropped her robe. And she was naked, and she got into the hot tub, and she sat there. And so while Jules was singing, he was mad at Todd, and he was thinking, "Yeah, but I'm looking at your wife naked while I'm singing." So,
oh, that's pretty funny.
Yeah.
That's pretty funny.
So yeah.
Well,
so,
anyway,
I
with that
made
image
that
in our mind,
we'll move on.
Story, but
yeah. So okay. So Pursuit of Happiness, and that goes when we got. I guess we have to accelerate a bit. But what I want to emphasize here is Jeff is an ideas guy, and like he just thinks of stuff like, okay, how do I do this and this and this? And I think that's a fantastic example for all of us. To figure out how to do something. Don't get stopped by, what you see as an obstacle, because you can work your way around it or over it or under it,
Yeah, or don't wait for someone to give you permission.
Yeah.
That's like, to me, that's the most important thing. I say it to every band that I work with. It's like, because if you're waiting for someone to give you permission, you're never going to get permission.
Yeah.
Right. And we have a default as Canadians.
Yes.
To wait for permit. I was saying to somebody said to me last night, I was at a party and they said, "Oh, have you been in the new Massey Hall?" And I was like, "Yeah, I like it okay." But and they said, "Well, how's the bar and the washrooms?" And I'm like, "Well, they're way better." But the rest of it's pretty much the same.
Pretty much the same, yeah.
And I said, but the bar, it was so Canadian in there, because you walk in and it's a giant room and there's two bars and everybody's in one line, and the other bar, nobody's in a line. And I'm like, I said, I was with my son at a show, and I said, "Oh, well, we'll go over. We should go." He goes, "I don't think you can go in that over there. It's like nobody's in that line." And so he wanted to stand in the long line, and I'm like, "No," and no Canadian would go to the front of the other line.
Right. Yeah.
So it's like, but you do need to go to the front of the line. That's another piece of advice. Just go to the front of the line and be there where you're supposed to be. Right.
Yeah.
But because also, popular wisdom, there's no, at that time, and I'm not disparaging Canadian labels in any way by saying this, but at that time, the Canadian labels would not have even dreamed of making a record for $175,000, and they would have never lied to Todd Rundgren, and they would have been too afraid to call him. I called him, none of the labels called him for me,
right?
And because I looked up, and I always would say like my contact, but people are like I'd meet with bands and they'd say, "Well, who are your contacts?" I'm like, "Do you have a phone book?"
Yeah.
Every person in the phone book is my contact.
And it's even more true now.
Yeah. It's easier to get a hold of people.
It's easier to get a hold of people.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's easier for them not to get back to you, though, too.
True.
Because I used to call I'd call like the Warner office in LA, and I'd talk to, there's a guy, Felix Chamberlain, that I would talk to there. I kind of knew them, but I'd call the offices and they'd say, "Well, who are you?" Because you're talking to their assistant. They'd be like, "Who are you?" And phone is a secret weapon now, because if you can get through on the phone, nobody else is calling them. But I'd basically like explain why it was going to be extremely important to put my call through.
Yes.
Because I'm talking to a lot of other labels, everybody's really interested, which is all true, but maybe my version of true.
A little bit, yeah.
And if you don't put me through, then when they call to say, why didn't you put that guy through? I'm going to say, because I talked to you, because I'd already asked their name and was really nice to them before that.
Right. Yeah, strategy. Empathy as well, though, because you're thinking about why it actually would be important to them.
Yeah.
It's not just self-interest. You're saying, I have an opportunity here for you,
Yeah, and it's like, why would you pass it up?
Yeah.
And also, it always was an opportunity. And
it's a legit thing. Yeah, you're not just bullshitting. Yeah.
I have a band that's selling out shows in Toronto.
Yeah.
And you can't tell because there's no internet.
Yeah, that's right. You can, and Canada theoretically doesn't matter, but it's still bodies in seats, still people buying records. It's still a real thing.
Yeah. And Canada always matters. I mean, it's bodies and seats that matter. It's like, can you sell 500 tickets someplace? It could be in North Carolina or Toronto or Hamilton or Kelowna or whatever. And if you can sell 500 tickets, and then you can turn it into 500 tickets in another town and 500 tickets in another town and 500 tickets in another town, people are going to be interested in you.
Right, yeah. So let's move forward now. Crash Test Dummies, how did they come into your life?
Well, oddly, Graham Henderson, he was their lawyer at the time, then became he worked at record labels, but he was the head of Music Canada, and he called me up and was like, "Oh, you should manage this band." And I said, "Oh, I don't think so. I'm really busy." And
he's
then,
always saying no.
And then,
no.
He sent me the cassette, or I picked it up from him or something.
Yeah.
And I had a cassette player in my office. I had this big warehouse space on Adelaide, and I had a cassette player, and it would just play over, like, the cassette would just play over and over, right?
Oh, okay.
So the cassette's playing over and over, and every time Superman's song came out, it was their demo. Every time Superman's song came on, I was like, "What is this song?" It's like, "Oh, it's that band." And then I was like, and after 3 days of listening to all these songs plus Superman's song, I was like, I called him like, "That one song's really good. I would like to talk to them." And then I was like, "I'm too busy to manage you, but I'll consult you." And then I made some deal with them. They had a manager, and it was somebody that I knew.
Okay.
But he felt he wasn't the right manager to continue on. He's in Winnipeg. Would have been an okay manager for them, actually. Yeah. But he was moving out of the position, and he sort of helped me. And then I would talk to them, and then basically they couldn't. I think after I figured out some rate, and then after a month they couldn't pay me anymore, so I just became their manager. And I remember flying out to see them at like some bar in Whistler, and they're like, I show up and I've got like skateboard shorts on, I have long hair, and I'm like, "Look, 12," and they're like, "You're Jeff." And I'm like, "Yeah," because I've only been talking to them. There's no Zoom or Google Meet, right?
Yeah.
Like they're talking to me on the phone, and I'm like, sound like I'm a manager guy.
Right.
And
so there was no cigar, fedora, etc.
Yeah. Years later, after the album came out, they were opening for Sting in Winnipeg, so I flew in for that show, and I took a cab, and the cab let me off at the far side of the parking lot, and I'm walking across. I guess parking lot wasn't open yet. And they were in a tour bus, and I'm walking towards the tour bus, and I look exactly the same. And Ellen is doing an interview. Ellen was the keyboard player and singer, and she's doing an interview. And the interviewer is asking her some things. She goes, "Hey, see that guy that looks like he's a skateboarder coming across the parking lot?" And he's like, "Yeah." He's like, "That's our manager." So they always thought that was...
Ellen would see the humor in that for sure.
Anyway, and then I managed them, and they had already had a record deal with BMG in Canada.
Yeah.
David Bendeth signed them, and he saw them at a music industry showcase thing in Manitoba. It's worth telling this, but it's like Richard Flowhill was seeing that they were playing in like a room that looked like this, and then there was like a big ballroom down the hall, and everybody's in the big ballroom seeing the bands that the Winnipeg music people or whoever organized the event was said, "These are the best bands in Winnipeg," and there's some other bands down the hall. Yeah. And so you can see any of them that you want. Yeah. So everybody's in that room, and Richard Flowhill's the only one watching Crash Test Dummies, and he walked down to the other room and got all the A&R people from the different labels and said, there's a band you need to see down here.
Yeah.
In fact, I saw Richard Flohill last night, and he told me about a band.
Yeah.
He's like, and Richard, how old is Richard?
87.
87. He's 87. He's like, if I managed them, they wouldn't be playing this gig. And he's like, I need to know what to do with them. And it's like, and I was like, okay, well, let's go for a walk.
Yeah.
And he took everybody in to see them.
Right.
And they had almost a little bidding war. And then I come in after that. They've already signed their deal. And then I took it around. I went and had lunch with somebody who I had met working in Woodstock when we were doing the record with
Todd record.
Todd, yeah, and through the A&R person. It was another A&R person. Well, he was a manager at the time, and then he became an A&R guy.
Right.
And I went to meet up with him, and I said, I have this band. I just signed them. They're on BMG Canada. You just got this job at Arista, which is an affiliate of BMG, and you could just pick it up.
Right, and it wouldn't cost you anything.
Yeah, and so they have like a matrix agreement, or that the time they they still do have a kind of matrix agreement between the different country labels.
So if a record is made here and paid for by the Canadian office, other territories can pick it up, and it costs them literally nothing to have this release. But they don't often do it because they want to sign the stuff they've invested their own money in. But it is an opportunity, and it's a low risk opportunity for them.
Yeah.
They don't automatically put it out in every territory.
They almost never put it out.
Very rarely. Capital Canada, the label that my band was on, they were begging the American office to put out our record. The horrible thing is you've signed this worldwide deal, which means you as a band or your management can't go to other territories to get it released because you're signed to a label that in that territory won't put you out.
And now what happens now is slightly different than what happened then, because we were talking about physical goods. But so now the local label, whatever country you're in, will put you on all streaming services worldwide, but nobody will market or promote it in the other territories.
Right.
Unless it starts to take off, and then they might jump on the bandwagon.
Right.
Like it's weird because you're in this weird situation, basically, right?
Yeah.
So you but you have to, whatever the situation you have, you make the best of that situation.
Right. Yeah.
And you can make the best of it because you have access to a worldwide market much more quickly and more easily.
Right.
So you can just encourage a publicist in England to help you or something like that, right?
Right.
So,
find a Richard Flohill.
Yeah.
In another territory.
Exactly.
He's amazing, by the way.
Yeah. He is amazing and still working.
Yeah. And has tons of opinions on music, and he's usually right.
And people believe him too.
Yeah,
like everyone believes him.
Incredible credibility.
And so what was? I was just saying about the pursuit. So anyway, Crash Test Dummies. So they pick. He takes it into the office, and this is like an old days thing, but all these kinds of things could still be done.
Sure.
But basically, he takes it in, and they're not immediately picking it up. They've never picked up a record from the Canadian office ever at Arista. And so Ken, who is the A&R guy, says, you should just write a letter to Clive Davis telling him why you want to be on Arista.
Right.
So I did that, and I mailed it to him in the regular mail, and then Rose, his assistant, put it on his desk. He opened it, and they would have meetings once a week with Clive where he'd set their priorities, tell them what to work on, what not to work on. And he read my letter out to them. And then he kept it on his desk. This is like weeks are going by, but it's like Ken would call me like, Clive still has your letter on his desk. And I was like, no way, that's amazing. And then there was like another A&R guy who didn't want to sign them that I had to sort of convince, and he was the head of A&R, or he was more senior A&R guy. Anyway, they eventually signed them. And I got to meet a lot of amazing people because Clive Davis had an incredibly good staff of people. And then I went, basically what I did as a manager, I went and made friends with all those people, and I'd had all this experience working with Honeymoon Suite and working with The Pursuit of Happiness. Right. And I knew that like, unless you had those people on your side and they saw you as something they owned and was part of their personality and who they were, it was really hard to get them to work on it otherwise.
You can see what a manager does just from these stories, though. There's so much more than just dealing with an agent and telling you need new band pictures and or whatever, that kind of thing. It involves massaging all these different areas. And I'm sure with the live music work as well, you're doing a lot of massaging there with agents and promoters, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, definitely. And getting to know, you have to know all the people. This is the hidden work of the manager, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, and often even when you're managing somebody that's not necessarily do they even know you're doing all that, right? Because you sort of have to integrate and become part of the band, but you're separate from the band.
Yeah, and you're the person the band will cry to. And one of the complaints I hear from managers and have for decades is they get calls in the middle of the night from somebody who's having an emotional problem with the bass player, you know, and they're having a fight, and the manager has to deal with this as if they're children. Not because they are children, but because being in a band is an emotional thing and so forth. But you have to clean up those messes. You didn't have that. That's good.
Well, one time a band did call me that was on. I had a label later on, and after Crash Test Dummies made some money, I started a label.
Right.
And then this band called me, and I was like, it was nighttime.
Yeah.
And I was like, it was late, and I was like, it's the middle of the night. Never call me again. If you want to even stay on the label, never call me again at night. You can call me in the morning. And then I hung up, and everything was fine. He was totally cool about it later. Right. He just didn't know. But also he was on the West Coast, so I should have cut him some slack.
Yeah.
But so I was probably a little bit more mean to him than necessary.
That's funny.
But I just made it be known that wasn't okay to do if he wanted the best work from me, right?
Yeah.
But I'd still, even now, I still work at night. But when I work at night, I like to be doing email or, doing some other kind of not talking to people work.
Yeah, and that kind of emotional work that you have to do can be forced upon you in a band. That shouldn't be happening. I mean, working in being in a band isn't like working in an office. So there are emotional things that happen.
Yeah.
But still, it shouldn't be. As grown-ups, we should take care of that stuff.
We should, but also, a lot of times specifically your manager is somebody you can rely on. Part of the thing you're relying on to your manager is to keep that part of you hidden from the label or your agent or the promoters, so that they don't start to think, oh, this is a liability.
Yeah, this is
an
unstable
They could not
situation.
show up for a gig. That's the thing they care about, the only thing they actually care about.
Right.
So you don't want the label to be like, oh, what if they don't show up to an interview? What if they do this? So you don't want any of that. So the manager does take that on to a certain extent and helps the artist to manage it. One of the things that happened later on in the world that didn't happen before is things like Music Cares in the US and Unison Benevolent Fund here, where you actually can refer your artist to someone that they're working in the music industry. They can call Unison Benevolent Fund, get someone to talk to about emotional state, and be able to do that. And that is amazing resource for everyone working in music.
Yeah, it's a much more humane way of dealing with things, I think.
Yeah, but you still have to help people if they need help.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, you're a decent human being.
We hope you've enjoyed this little taste of the SongStudio workshop in Toronto in July 2022. Stay tuned for more.